Hello. We are continuing looking at the Aberfan extract for this video, but we're now going to be turning to Paper 2 Question 3, which is language analysis for Paper 2. If you're joining us from the Paper 2 Question 2 video, then you might already be familiar, of course, with the Aberfan extract. We don't need to use the London earthquake extract for this question, because we are just looking at source A. So contextually, just to remind you what we're talking about here, so the Aberfan disaster was in 1966, and you can see that it was really a huge landslide that fell down the side of the valley and into the village, including the primary school. 116 children and 28 adults were killed. So this is one of the worst disasters of the 20th century in the UK, and it happened because the coal mine, as you can see there, kind of top right of the image, they put mining waste in big piles, as you can see there, on top of the valley, and when the rains came, it loosened the coal waste, and it basically had no choice but to fall down the side of the mountain and destroy the village. So it was an emotive but also quite horrific disaster. So we are interested in the question, how does the writer use language to describe the coal tips? And the coal tips is just the word for those mountains, as you could see there, that in the top right hand side, these kind of pyramid-like piles of coal waste. That is what the coal tips are. So the writer says, on the mountain above Aberfan there were 7 such tips. The evening sun sank early behind them. To some of the younger generation they had always been there, as though dumped by the hand of God. They could be seen from the school windows immediately below them, rising like black pyramids in the western sky. But they were not as solid as they looked. It was known that several had moved in the past, inching ominously down the mountain. What was not known, however, was that the newest tip, number 7, was a killer with a rotten heart. It had been begun in Easter 1958 and was built on a mountain spring, most treacherous of all foundations. Gradually, over the years, the fatal seeping of water was turning tip 7 into a mountain of moving muck. Then one morning, out of the mist, the unthinkable happened, and the tip came down on the village. The children of Pantglas Junior School had just arrived in their classrooms and were right in the path of it. They were the first to be hit by the wave of stupefying filth which instantly smothered more than 100 of them. Okay, so you might get the sense there of the emotive side of this story. Remember the question is, how does the writer use language to describe the coal tips? So we need now to look at this extract and pick out a selection of words and phrases which we think the writer has used deliberately in order to present this pile of coal in a particular way. And we also need to think about what way that is. How have they been presented? We'll talk more about that in a second. So you can pause the video now and write down some ideas about which words or phrases you would like to use. You might want to also think of some techniques that go along with them. But if you want to carry on watching, then I'll go and give you some of the potential words you could use. So here we have a selection of techniques. We have a simile in yellow there. We have personification in green. Could also be a metaphor, I suppose, but I'm going to call it personification. We've got the alliteration in blue of that M sound. And we've got the metaphor where the pile of coal is likened to a wave, and we have the verb smothered. So this is some, perhaps, of the words and phrases you could use. There are others, of course, as well, but this is what I would want to look at, I think, because I think I could do quite a bit with this in the time. So this is a 12 marker. You've got approximately 15 minutes, so longer, perhaps, than questions 1 and 2, but not that long in terms of question 5. So it's a bit more time, but still not a lot of time. So again, be realistic with how much you could do, you think, in that time. So we've got our techniques, we've got our evidence, but the final bit of the mark scheme is really the effects of language choice. In other words, why has the writer chosen these words and phrases? How do they present the cold tip? So some questions that you might want to ask yourself or think about before we begin thinking about the responses. Why has the writer compared the cold tip to a pyramid? What are the characteristics that pyramids share with the piles of coal that we saw in that picture at the beginning? What does it mean to have a rotten heart? If you say to somebody that they've got a rotten heart, what does that mean? And why might that also link to a murderer or somebody that will want to cause harm deliberately on somebody else? What does that mean to have a rotten heart? Why use the word mountain? What does it mean to be smothered in that verb there? When you're smothered, why could that have quite uncomfortable connotations? And why compare the landslide to a wave? What does that remind you of in terms of a very large wave? What do we call that? And how might that idea of being, I suppose, swamped with a wave, how does that link to being smothered? What is the writer trying to tell us about, the way in which this coal harmed other people? So just some questions there to think about, and the answers to those will obviously inform your analysis. So here we have a table. On the left-hand side, we have the evidence. In the middle, we have the technique. But importantly, on the right-hand side, we have the answers, really, the effects. How does this present the cold tip? So that question is very important because it shows that we're answering the question. It's very easy to go off on a tangent with English and not answer the question. So everything we say for this response has to be to do with how the writer is presenting these cold tips to us. And you can see in this end column, the right-hand side, I've just listed some ideas, really, that help us to think about how the writer has presented these piles of coal. So we've got some connotations, we've got some imagery in there, and some interesting kind of ideas. So again, you can pause the video to look at those more in detail, but I'm now going to use these effects to then show you what it now means to write quite a successful response for language. So first thing I want to show you before I give you an exemplar is begin your language response by answering the question immediately, and then after that support that interpretation with evidence and the techniques from the text. So the example I've given you here, this is how I would start it. The writer presents the cold tips as vicious, cruel, and intent on causing the suffering of innocent people. Okay, so already I am answering the question. That would get you some marks straight away because you're already interpreting things. You're already analysing something. So the underlined bit there, you're answering in effect the question. And then after that, I have to then link that interpretation to the evidence, because it's the evidence at the end of the day that is giving me that interpretation. So it says one of the ways the writer does this is through using personification, in which the pile of coal waste is likened to a killer with a rotten heart, suggesting the coal tip has no feelings or remorse for the cruelty it was planning to unleash onto others. It's almost as if the writer is suggesting the coal tip had no conscience or empathy and decided to malevolently harm others without caring for their welfare. Malevolently means kind of evil and bad. So that is how I would start it. Sometimes students always ask, how do I begin? So I would begin by writing a sentence like that, where I immediately answer the question straight away, and then after that use the evidence to reinforce why that interpretation is accurate. So to give you I suppose two examples. One of them is not as successful as the other. On the left-hand side, we have a simplistic response, and on the right-hand side, we have a more detailed response. So a more simplistic response would be, the writer says that the coal tip was a mountain, meaning it was very high and dirty. The writer uses a simile, black pyramid, and the verb smothered, meaning the coal tip was very bad and large. So yes, they're quoting, yes, they've got some terminology, but it's not particularly detailed about the effects. Why has a mountain been used? What does a pyramid have in common? What does it mean to be smothered? So they haven't really gone into detail about why those words have been used. So that would probably, this is a 12 marker, so that might get you, let's say, 3 out of 12. So towards the bottom of the mark scheme. If you wanted to push it and improve it, then you would need to perhaps to get something more towards the top of the mark scheme to write something which is on the right-hand side. The coal tip is described as vicious, evil, and intent on causing suffering to the villagers below. For example, the writer uses the simile in which the tip is compared to a black pyramid, which suggests the pile of coal was towering into the sky and triangular in shape, like the pyramids in Egypt. This is reinforced through the alliteration when the pile of coal is compared to a mountain of moving muck, which emphasizes the destructive and inescapable movement of the landslide. Mountains are very high, or very large, and don't usually move, so to have this moving down the hillside would be incredibly damaging and scary. The inescapable element is conveyed through the verb smothered and metaphor wave, suggesting the villagers were suffocated and overwhelmed by the amount of coal that slid down the valley, as if they were drowned. As a result, the writer personifies the coal tip as a killer with a rotten heart, suggesting it had no empathy or compassion for people's safety and was intent on causing harm and destruction. So that would get you, what should I say, 10 out of 12, perhaps more. So basically more confident than the one on the right, on the left-hand side. Okay, so that is what language analysis is. I've done a lot of videos on language analysis, but this is the example for this paper in particular. So in summary with language analysis, remember there are 3 parts of the mark scheme. You need quotes from the extract, you need some techniques, but more importantly, you need to be able to develop the effects of language choice. In other words, why has the writer used the words and phrases that they have, and how does that present the thing that is being described to you?